Okay. Hello. Today, we're delighted to be with two editors, freelance editors, who have worked with Etruscan and as well have worked on many other projects that they're going to talk about. Karley Stasko and Janine Dubik are both experienced and outstanding editors and graduates of the Wilkes MFA program, where they did their internship in publishing following the publishing course that we do with the residency. So welcome, Janine and Karley.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Can you tell us a little bit, Janine, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about how you got into editing as a profession.
I started as a newspaper reporter and then moved up to the city desk and spent nearly 20 years on the night desk.
Okay. How did you make that transition then from say journal, or newspaper editing to literary book editing?
It's kind of the same thing. You're looking to make sure that there's consistencies. You're looking to make sure that names are spelled properly. Formatting is correct. You're constantly looking for the consistency. You're looking for that it follows logically through the whole manuscript.
Right.
It wasn't that much different.
Okay, so you felt that your experience really kind of led directly to that. Karley, how about you? I know you've done academic editing for people who are academics and who maybe are not professional writers.
Yeah, so when I was in the MA program, I started doing graduate research assistance work for the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Wilkes. So everything from global economics, academic papers, to reports on fracking, just a lot of nitty-gritty here and there kind of stuff. And when I was originally getting into the MFA program, that first day I was convinced that I was going to go into the teaching track. Because I already had a teaching gig lined up. I had taught college class previously, and I thought, okay, this is something easy to slide into. And then I ended up talking with a friend, and we were talking ourselves in circles the whole residency, trying to figure out, well, do we dip our toes into something we haven't really done before, or do we stick with what we've already got lined up? And I will say there's a tiny bit of regret of how much I stressed myself out with everything I did that semester, but I really can't regret choosing to go the publishing track, just because of how well it fits into everything else I was doing.
Right, and Janine points out that there's a lot of consistency between, say, newspaper editing and then book editing. You come from a little different background. Did you find that there was a consistency or a major transition between the kind of editing that you were doing for academic papers and then the kind of editing we found ourselves involved in with fiction?
I think the biggest difference in terms of academic writing versus any creative writing editing process is that when you're editing creative writing, poetry, memoir, anything, you really have to spend some time getting to know the author's voice first. And I think that was something that not necessarily I was surprised by, but it was never told to me. That there has to be a really strong connection with knowing what the author's intending to say and how they're intending to say it. And if there's that miscommunication, that lack of clarity, how do you fix it in a way that they would want to fix it? Not necessarily what your creative writer mind wants to say. So it's kind of like putting that ego aside for a second and pretending to be someone else. Was something I didn't have to do academically. I could be very egotistical and write over everything.
That's such a great point. I mean, I found, I was so fortunate. I had several copy editors. One copy editor for my last book, Phantom Signs. One of the copy editors, and I've done two books with Phantom Signs. I had two books with the University of Tennessee, and the same experience, which was that their copy editor had some kind of rule book that I was breaking a lot. And it was like, after a while, you begin to doubt yourself because you're getting all these, it's like you're back in, with the nuns, you're getting all these red marks. And then I began, I think, that process, because I had been writing, before that I'd been writing poetry, and generally speaking, poetry doesn't get copy edited, so to speak, because nobody knows what the hell we're doing anyway. And everybody's making up their own rules, more or less, in terms of formatting. So, I mean, Etruscan, we may give a once over to a manuscript, but we leave the poetry copy editing more or less to the poets. But these were 2 books of essays, and as I say, what Karley is talking about is that I found that the voice was somehow at odds with whatever grammatical rule system was being imposed. And it was through that observation that I recognized what the characteristics of my own voice notated on the page were. And so you guys then had a look at phantom signs. And I think one of the things that's so cool is that you immediately used your experience to attune yourself to the voice as it was. So let me ask you a question. So we're dipping our toes into the water. We're going to get into the shark-infested waters soon. The big project that we worked on, the novel 16. But before we go there, just talk a little bit about Phantom Signs and the fact that that's a project you guys worked on together. What was it like copy editing together? Janine, was that? Usually copy editing is something one does alone.
Well, even with 16, I know we're going to talk about it later, but a group of us, if there was something that I missed, Karley picked it up, or somebody else in the group, there is a reassurance that, okay, I didn't see that, somebody else will get it. If you're editing a book by yourself, you're constantly questioning, am I doing this right? Am I not contributing any additional errors to something? You want to be sure that whatever you're correcting is correct.
Karley, did you find yourself at any point, not just maybe missing something that you found? I know both of you guys made miracle finds. I can remember just like, wow, look at that. They must have dug really deep. But did you ever find yourself saying, no, I don't agree with that?
Not often, and I think that probably comes from having a bit of a teaching background prior to this, that I would always let my students know in advance that when they got a paper back from me, they were going to see a lot of red. And that would probably have no immediate reflection on their grade, because I have something to say about everything. And they would know that my advice was, listen, if you listen to every single piece of advice that my little goblin brain fires off, it's going to end up sounding terrible. And even worse, it's going to end up not sounding like you. So like seeing someone else's perspective was just part of that collaborative effort. And I think that's another thing about putting the ego aside and saying, like, this might sound better to me, but am I the intended audience? Is there a general consensus elsewhere? Because, there's stuff that I don't like that's out of the general consensus. I like the last season of Game of Thrones. So who am I to judge?
Don't worry, we'll edit that part out.
No, that is a hill I'm willing to die on.
Ooh, them dragons. So why don't we then, get? I want to emphasize what Karley just said. It's interesting for me too. I struggle with that as a teacher. And I think if I should have thought of what you just said, and say, I should tell them in advance, I'm gonna be me, and me is not a person you want to meet in a dark alley, with a lot of pros around. And I think that's a real gift to give to students, is to take off that kind of gentle teacher hat. And frankly, I can only do that myself when I'm thinking like an editor. And I say, look, I know in the 616 class, one of the exercises we do is 100 words. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I'll go around the class and say, no, take this out, get rid of this. It's like shorthand But I love the fact that you're integrating that strength and transparency into a classroom. So it's like teaching editing,
Oh,
which, and
absolutely.
sometimes those things can be so difficult because people, nobody likes to have their work graded in, with a red pencil and all. Well, okay, let's go into the big, why don't we go into 16, which was a novel written by a Greek author named Auguste Courteau. And just to give you some sense of where we're coming from here, this novel first came to Etruscan in, I believe, 2012 or 2013. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. Thought it was brilliant. I mean, basically the idea is that the KGB in the 50s, after the death of Stalin, they believed that a musical composition is causing disaffection from communism. And they're attempting to investigate, and the main character is the composer's protege, and the composer has died. So that's where it began, and it just goes all over the place. You meet all these characters, including Khrushchev and Thomas Mann, all sorts of, I always, say something like Dostoevsky meets Dan Larson. It's got an incredible plot. So there it was, but we didn't take it. I kept in correspondence, and I didn't know if I ever told you this, but Auguste Courteau kept sending us more novels after 16. 16 was the best. In about 2018, I guess it was, another friend of mine who was an editor said, "Whatever happened to that novel?" I said, "Well, it was just too much, and it was too rough." And because Auguste Courteau is not a native English speaker, he says, "I'll take it on." Well, he did, but then he had a health issue. And so we took the novel and we basically brought it to Bob Mooney, and then we gave it to you guys. So I'm going to let you guys take over. Tell us what it was like to have 16, this massive tome, tossed in your lap. Karley, you want to start?
Sure. So because I was coming at it with little editorial experience, I couldn't have been thrown into a better project because I think I would have had a lot more hesitancy in other editing. It was, hold on, I actually have both copies. And I do like to use this in the classroom as well to show students, I don't know how well you can see it, but the difference in thickness of what editing does to it. But yeah, even I remember we all worked together on that like first page of how rough it was initially. Well, let's see if we could get, yeah, you could see a bunch of my markings here. And that's what the whole text looks like. It was just go through, and it helped me develop a system where I read it once just to get a feel for the voice, a feel for the story, and understanding of what's going on. And then sort of follow up with that sort of holistic, not be afraid to put pen to page and say, this doesn't work, this is wrong. I could always change my mind later before I type it in, and work together on that. So I think there was a lot of, even though it really is a collective experience, there was a lot of tinkering on my own. There was a lot of moments where I would kind of like turn to my boyfriend on the couch and read him a line and say, does it sound better in this order or in this order? And, getting that sort of little bits of feedback here and there. And I have never seen a project that needed as much help then. But that's not to say it wasn't worth it. Like, Gay Da Vinci Code in Soviet Russia is, one of my favorite books. So definitely, I would say if you are going to be speaking directly to the students, if you are going to be going into the publishing route, starting with a complicated work and being able to kind of like hammer out all of that sort of crazy stuff of dealing with an ESL writer, of dealing with an era specific work as well, that you had to be mindful of various facts, even though it was a satirical work, it was still, being mindful of dates, of names, all that sort of information, that like nitty gritty that I don't think it would have worked if it wasn't, a collective effort, a collective systematic effort.
Janine, tell us what it was like for you.
Well, sometimes it seemed overwhelming. I mean, I love the premise of it, and I was quite taken back sometimes with the number of himselfs, herselfs, itselfs. I just wanted to scream sometimes, but you go through and you start taking them out, and as Karley says, you start making sure that it's facts, that nobody picked up the cell phone because it's 1950s and cell phones don't exist. So yeah, there was a lot of, is this right? And Khrushchev and khakis, and it was, it was, I'm glad that it was a collective effort. I know that I personally couldn't have handled that and gotten it into the shape it is in by myself. So, I mean, the collective effort was a great idea and a great we all seemed to work very well together until the PDF got too big and we couldn't stick to it.
Right. Well, Karley, actually, I think Karley, you were the one who taught us that magic Google thing.
Oh, Google Drive.
Where people could work on the same document?
Oh yeah. I'm going to be, you know what, my biggest secret from the MFA program is that I wrote at least like an eighth of that paper in the shower with the waterproof cell phone case on Google Docs using voice to text. Like I would get an idea and just be like, all right, start date, whatever, start reading into the phone. So yeah, a lot of that paper was written on Google Docs using voice to text, just spitting out ideas at the worst times.
Right, and then we could see in real time the changes that other people were making, which was, that was an education for me. To see,
yeah.
This is interesting. In fact, I think it would be fun. I'm so glad that that Karley has the two copies to save. That one day that's going to be worth a lot of money, Karley. That uncorrected proof.
Yes.
It's going to be like Mickey Mantle's autograph. But another anomaly is that the whole process, the usual process, got jumbled. Yeah. Because of people dropping out. As my friend who had health issues, we had another person who tried to take it on but couldn't, and so we moved ahead with the uncorrected proof, which is not our usual method. Usually the uncorrected proof, it says uncorrected proof, but it's really supposed to be very, very close to the final text, because at that point the designer is making changes that cost time and therefore cost money. And so we had to sink a lot of money into the redesign of the book, and that obviously that was not optimal. That was a kind of an emergency thing that we did. And I would love it, Karley, if maybe, just that first paragraph, if you would read us a few sentences from the uncorrected proof, and then to show what kind of work we're talking about here. It's not, I think people have the mistaken idea that this is just about correcting mistakes. Whereas, grammatical mistakes that can be found in strong, Funk and Wagnall, it's not, that's one of the things, but there's a lot more to it. And I think if you just read first, first couple of sentences from the original uncorrected proof, and then where we got it to.
Okay, but you will have to excuse all of my Russian pronunciation because my brain sometimes just makes a white noise with half of the names in here. So we'll work hard.
Yeah.
Then you too must be out of your mind, Comrade Samolenko. Strunsky's face went purple as he spat these words, the eyes exorbitant, the nose twitching like the snout of a hog in heat. Alexei Mikhailovich Salamenko drew back, although he knew this moment of brutality was only a show. Here was the formidable Strunsky, on his way down, dread seizing him tighter with each passing day that brought more and news of more defections, insubordination, the contagion of nonsensical chaos. That the man actually believed the composition of a single symphony was the cause of it all, that one piece of music could bring down an empire. The man's panic was visible even in the way he collapsed into his leather-winged chair, slouching and sighing and unbuttoning his tunic, and in the shaking hands in which he poured himself another tumbler full of Stoli and lit a Brazilian cigar. A fine hand-rolled piece of work that Salamanco, except for his fear seizing him, would not have been the least bit squeamish about putting into his own mouth.
Okay. So that's the uncorrected version.
Yes. And then this is the corrected version. Then you too must be out of your mind, Comrade Salamenko. Strunsky's face went purple, the eyes swollen, the nose twitching like the snout of a hog in heat. Alexei Mikhailovich Salamenko flinched, though he knew this moment of brutality was only a show. Here was a formidable Strunsky, dread seizing him tighter with each new defection. The man actually believed that one piece of music could bring down an empire. Strunsky's panic was visible even in the way he collapsed into his wing chair, and in those shaking hands with which he poured himself another tumbler full of Stoli and lit a Brazilian cigar.
Right. So you can see what, maybe Janine want to describe for us what you hear in those two versions and what you think the overall theme of the editing was.
We're looking, if I remember, it was there were lengthy descriptions of everything.
Yeah.
And it was our job to weed through and take out the ones that, like the description of the wing chair, we took out. There were everything was quite extensive and descriptive, and we had to pull out what wasn't going to work and make it more efficient.
Exactly. And that process, which I would say that went from 100 words to about 75 words. You took out a quarter of the words, and that was actually, that can be seen in the very spine of that. I think we took out maybe a quarter, and it went at all levels. I mean, there were whole chapters that because Mooney was doing this at the level working directly with Auguste Courteau, and he was working at the level of structure. And so there were whole, and I was working at the level somewhat of paragraph and taking whole, slash, slash, slash. And then you guys got in and just, you saw what Janine is describing, which is that this was Gothic. It was ornate, and it didn't need to be. The style, the comic vision was somewhere in there. It's just that I think, and what's interesting to me is I think that in some ways it wasn't just a failure of language. It was a failure to some degree to trust the reader. And that could be because, I mean, look, Auguste Courteau is a brilliant man and a brilliant speaker of English. I mean, this is his third language. He speaks French, he speaks, Greek is his native tongue. So, I mean, to critique his English, it's a lot better than my Greek, But the point is that one of the things that comes with a voice is communicating with the reader, trusting the reader. And that's what you guys allowed to come through, so that the nose is not exorbitant and a pig snout. We see where he's going.
Right.
And we can also see, I feel, that he has a certain touch. He begins right in the middle of this hilarious scene between a KGB agent and this, a student musician. It's everybody's worst nightmare, and we don't know exactly what it's about, but we don't care because it's so interesting. So you guys, brought that to bear, and I think that's what you did, which was you brought a theme that Janine just described. It wasn't just that you were making changes on a page-by-page basis. You were making overall thematic changes to the voice, not to disrespect or change the voice to yours, but to bring it out.
Yeah, there was a lot of choice. Like you said, with it doesn't need to be exorbitant and a pig snout. So a lot of what we were doing was finding all of those moments where it was, where they were pulling for the rule of threes and we're like, just one. Which one of these works the best? And I think if there was any contention, it might have been, thinking that this description was better than this one. But either worked in what was the tone that was necessary.
Right. And then, this writer, like many of us, has writerly tics. And Janine pointed one out, the himself, the herself. He himself did this. And himself. He's like, oh, come on. If you say it once, it doesn't necessarily stick with you. But when you see it page after page after page, which is one thing I think that is different perhaps with newspaper writing with a novel, you have to keep track of all that's gone on, before. It's not, it doesn't die with yesterday's print. You've got to figure out, wait a minute, back on page 22, this happened. How did that?
The priest, Alexi's friend, was the singer.
Vittorio.
Yes. And at one point he was a tenor, at another point he was a baritone. That's the type of inconsistencies that you have to be looking for in an edit when you're editing. Is he a tenor or is he a baritone? And I go to my husband, okay, would a baritone sing blah blah blah? And he's like, no. So
Right. You have to be structurally aware. You have to kind of keep all of this because in your mind, because a writer is really trying to build a coherent world.
Right.
And you're like the people at the Matrix, who are showing, oh, there's a glitch in the system. You see that black cat twice, and you guys are fixing the Matrix, so to speak, because of course it's a fictional world, but it has to appear consistent and coherent, and that's what you guys bring to the table. And so my question comes then: you're both writers. How does the editing part of your head coexist with and perhaps even complement the writing part of your head, Janine?
Oh, my editor is too strong. She that's probably one of, as a writer, that's probably one of my biggest problems, is that the editor doesn't know that she needs to sit in the corner and let this come out, and then she can do it. She's got to know that's the wrong word. And yeah, that's my biggest issue as a writer, is that the editor doesn't wait till it's her turn.
Right. Karley?
I am very much the opposite. The editor is not invited to the party when I write. And to be fair, I had to train myself to do that. Now with the type of writing I do within, I work in an art gallery, and a lot of the stuff is very quick turnaround. I'm doing a lot of technical writing for that, but also creative social media kind of stuff and grant writing. And all throughout, one thing that I've really learned to do is that if I try to let the editor out, I will dwell while I'm writing. So instead, I have a tendency to all caps, just write, and then some other shiz, you need to add here and move on. And I think, telling the editor in your brain, it's okay that we don't have the exact right word right now, we can figure that one out later, could be the difference between, finishing that page that I need written today and not being able to get to the end of the paragraph because I'm stuck on a word.
Right. Well, I love the idea. I mean, you're finding ways to trick your editor out of the room. Like, for instance, walking into a shower with a cell phone that has plastic on it, the editor can't go in there. Editor's not going to get wet, and so, you're able to do that, which is, of course, also the point, one of the exercises that we do in 616, that first 100 words, to get it off the page really is to make sure that editor is not invited to the party, because you got to say it out loud and therefore you're just kind of hearing your voice as opposed to transcribing it immediately. You know, kind of remembering that the act of transcription is a secondary act. You know, that it first happens here and then in the mouth. And I'm in Janine's camp. I'm going to have a tattoo made. If you not willing to write badly, you can't write well. You know, and that's my mantra. I love I love these various tricks, and I think that for me at least, the coexistence of these two faculties, you know, the faculty of the taking pleasure in those sentences and tinkering with those sentences. It's enormous pleasure, versus the sometimes perhaps pleasure of taking flight creatively, but there's also an enormous amount of fear, because you can never fail with a sentence. You know, I mean, you're going to get there with that one sentence, but with the with the large issues, failure is expected. You know, almost if not common. It's common if not expected. So that's something I know I've struggled with, and I'm interested to hear your take on those two occupations. Thank you guys so much. You saved the book. You literally, I mean, when people talk about whales and seals, and you guys saved a great book, and it would not have happened without you. And we look forward to continue to working with you, except we hope never to thrust upon you something quite as overwhelming as 16 was. But please stay safe. Keep the sentences flowing, and let's stay in touch. Thank you so much. Janine Dubik, Karley Stasko.